Welcome, everyone, to Coffee with Sales Engineers. Our intention here is really to share amazing, inspiring, empowering stories from the field. We'll hear from sales engineer experts, people that are new to sales engineering, people that have been in sales engineering, about how they fell into it, what keeps them going, and hear some insights from their journey. So, my name is Sachin Wadhawan. I'm your host of Coffee with Sales Engineers today, and super excited to have Chris Browne joining us in this very casual coffee with sales engineer. And I think, Chris, I saw you drinking tea. So
I am drinking tea, yes.
maybe it's a combination of coffee and tea with sales
I
engineers
like
today.
it.
So we'll do that.
That's a good ring.
So thank you for joining us, Chris. Why don't you give us a quick introduction about who you are, what do you do, and then we'll dive right into some of our discussion.
Sounds good. So my name is Chris Browne. I'm based in Austin, Texas, and I'm currently the Senior Director of Solutions at Lattice, which is a people performance management platform helping companies get the most out of their high-performing employees, doing everything from performance reviews and engagement surveys through goals, career planning, and compensation management. I've been here about 2.5 years, but I've been in the pre-sales, sales engineering space for the last, at this point, 16 or 17 years. So it's been quite a while. Looking forward to the conversation today, Sachin.
Long time. You must love being in sales engineering. I can
I
get.
do. I do, yes.
There are many of us that are what do I call it? Sales engineer lifers or sales engineers for life. And as you hear about this profession, and for those of you that are in this profession, I think you can relate to why. So, but you didn't go to an undergrad in sales engineering, if I remember.
I did not.
Did you get a master's in sales engineering, Chris?
I did not. No, I was an econ major in college. I actually thought I was going to spend my career in finance. And after 2 years of doing that right out of school, I decided that was not for me. And had a bunch of friends, buddies from college who had somehow found their way into tech sales. This is back in 2000, 2001, the peak of the first dot-com boom. And I saw they were making good money and having, pretty good lives. And I'm like, if they could do it, why can't I? And that's ultimately what led me into tech sales, starting out as a BDR, pounding the phones. I was probably one of the early people who started using emailing as a prospecting technique. This is well before any automated sequences. It was just, sending emails one by one and having them logged in Salesforce. I was also probably one of the early Salesforce users. This is 2001 in San Francisco. Remember actually going to the Salesforce headquarters at the time for one of my college buddies who was an SDR there at the time. And just a really small ecosystem, but that's where I got my start and did that for a couple of years before moving into field sales.
Amazing. So finance to BDR. So at some point you were like, finance is not for me. I want to go into sales. So that was like your foray into sales.
It was, yes.
You got to live through some of the worst part of sales, the hardest part of sales, right? With a lot of sales engineers who have never been in sales or have never been BDRs may not experience that, because by the time sales engineers are brought into the sales cycle, all of that magic has already happened, right? We're just brought in to do the show. So amazing that you had that experience. How did you go from BDR to becoming an SE?
Yeah, funnily enough, it actually was the direct result of one of my BDR roles. So I was hired as the first BDR at a startup out of Santa Barbara. And when I joined, they had just licensed Salesforce. And they essentially asked me to be the Salesforce admin on top of my prospecting duties. And I'm always up for a new challenge. So I was like, sure. And over the course of the year and a half that I was in that role, I got really good at administering Salesforce, everything from report building to back-end database administration. And it gave me a really solid grounding in just general database technology principles, etc. And when I moved into my first field role, small startup out of Boston, they coincidentally had just started using Salesforce as well. And I mentioned that to my boss at the time. And he was like, oh, okay, we'll have you be our Salesforce admin. That works perfect. Started doing that there in addition to being a field rep. It was a really small company, so we were full stack AEs. We were doing everything from prospecting to that mid-funnel solutioning, product demonstrations, all the way through negotiating contracts and closing deals. And as I moved through that role for the first year, I really found myself gravitating towards that middle part of the funnel, being that product expert. Ended up becoming the de facto go to product expert within that 4-person team. I was okay at sales. I had my fair share of wins and losses, but I really found myself gravitating towards that solution part of the sales cycle. About a year and a half in, we got acquired, and the acquiring company was much bigger. They were what was called at the time a technology enabled services provider. So they had a full range of products and services they offered, a very generalist sales team. And we found ourselves starting to get leveraged as overlays. These generalists would bring us into their accounts and we would pitch the SaaS product that we were selling. And more, I was doing less prospecting and doing more and more demos. And I liked it. And I was getting good commissions on those deals the generalists were closing. And at the end of that year, as all good things come to an end, we were given a choice. You can either keep being a salesperson, but now you got to sell everything, or you can join this newly formed sales engineering team and just focus on the SaaS product. And I did the mental math in my head in terms of what I had made the last 2 years as a salesperson, what I could expect to make in that SC role, essentially getting a roll up of the region I was supporting.
Mhm.
And for me, it was a no brainer. I'm like, oh, cool. I don't have to prospect anymore. I can focus on the technology and what I really love. And that's what led me into that position and haven't looked back since.
What an amazing experience. We got to unpack that. That was
All right.
like, that was a lot of amazing things that happened that led you to where you ended up being, right?
Yep.
First thing around at this point, again, we're talking some while back, even though I always complain that there's still lack of awareness for what sales engineering is. Honestly, the
Yep.
reason I want to do these podcasts to raise that awareness. But back then, 10, 15 years ago, was even worse. So
Yeah.
you were in an environment where even the company that you were around or the environment you were in, there was no label of sales engineering. You had overlays, right? So it was the company determined that there's these people that are really good at selling and these people that understand the technology. So let's separate them and have the specialist kind of work with the people that are just focused on sales, right? So
Yep.
it sounds like the brewing of what ended up becoming sales engineering eventually. Uh,
Exactly. Exactly. We didn't even have our own manager. We were just a ragtag group of 8 people spread across the country. We all reported into the regional VP of the areas we were based in. I was supporting the Tola region, plus I think the Rocky Mountain states. And we'd get together a couple times a year. We'd see each other at trade show conferences, and once or twice a year we'd make it back to our HQ in Boston and
yeah,
spend a few days together. But outside of that, we were very much a motley crew, all doing our own thing. But it somehow worked for the 4 years that we were all in it together, and for me, created a real strong baseline of what it meant not only to be a good SE, but to partner with salespeople, how to be scrappy and just enable yourself as new product capabilities come in. We didn't really have any infrastructure to support anything beyond what we were doing to support the sales cycle. Everything else we made up on our own as we went along.
yeah, do whatever you can to win the deal. And
Exactly.
it wouldn't surprise me if there's still so many companies out there that are going through that evolution. Most of the companies that I've gone into as an SE leader, I found myself that sales engineering was happening. It was just happening by some really smart account managers, some really smart implementation people. It was a
Yep.
role that was inherited by multiple functions throughout the company. But then I had to go in and say, no, this is not somebody's second or third or fourth job. This is a real job, and we need to build a
Yep.
function around that. So it's amazing that you got
Exactly.
to live through that. Now, if I'm a BDR listening to this
Yep.
is what I want to unpack. Sales engineering has engineering in the name.
Yep.
A lot of people may think if I'm a BDR, I'm like, look, man, I didn't go to undergrad in computer science or MIS degree or any sort of engineering. This is not for me, right? Like,
Yeah.
I'm not the techie, but you weren't either. But
Yep.
you, because you were the earlier on adopter of a technology like Salesforce, you found strength in becoming an expert in that. That didn't require an engineering degree. It's just,
Yep.
it's a CRM tool that you're using. What was it about you? If you think back, what was it about you as an individual that was able to separate from maybe other sales reps who were
Yep.
also using the software? Like,
Yeah.
what positioned you into becoming an admin and becoming an expert in this
Yeah.
technology that you guys were inheriting?
It's a great question. I've always thought of myself as a lifelong learner. I'm a very naturally curious person. I like digging deep and figuring out the why behind the why. Even today in my current role, I really pride myself on figuring out the answers to things on my own, not expecting anything to get spoon fed to me, but rather spending the time, whether it's 5 minutes or 30 minutes or an hour, to figure out the problem behind what I'm trying to solve. And what I found is by actually doing that work and going through that exercise, even if it might be challenging as you struggle through it, it really solidifies that learning versus having something spoon fed to you where the answer served up on a plate, whether through another expert in the company or increasingly more a nice little handy chat GPT search. You get the answer, you cut and paste, you move on with your day. You're not really learning anything there. And so for me, I really like to struggle through that process of getting to the answer. And I find that when I do that, I ultimately, those concepts stick. And that's something I've done my entire career. And I think in that middle part, when I was that BDR struggling through the day, cold calling, emailing, etc., I found myself gravitating towards these little solutions, like how do I build a report in Salesforce? It was something that I could fully control the outcome around versus I can make 100 calls and I might set 0 meetings for that day. There was something rewarding in that solving the problem that part of the role entailed. And that's where I increasingly found myself gravitating towards as I got good at the prospecting part and knew exactly what I needed to do on any given day to hit my quotas. I found myself spending more and more time on the technology part of things. And that even persisted into my field role, becoming that product expert on the sales team for what we were selling and going beyond just doing the demo, but understanding the back end database architecture and how to configure an account from scratch for a new customer, effectively going through that onboarding implementation, just learning it myself so that I felt like I could articulate the full cycle or process of what we were deploying to our customers versus reading off a script or just mimicking what I heard from someone else.
Yeah, which is amazing because that you and I know that even when we recruit for SCs, one of the key skills we're looking for is that passion for technology, actual curiosity, that desire or grit to solve problems. When you talk to, I've seen a lot of BDRs and sales reps
Mm-hmm.
that also have those qualities. You can be successful in sales if you're not resourceful or if you're not looking to solve a problem that your prospect has, or you're not trying to figure things out, right?
Right.
Whatever the sales process is, you're navigating challenges all around. It's interesting that many BDRs and sales reps, account managers may also inherit those qualities, but they may not know that
Right.
those same qualities can be applied for a profession like sales engineering, which
Yeah, absolutely.
you happen to be in an environment where they needed more people like you, and hence it just happened that role become formalized. And when you were acquired, that company labeled sales engineering, and there was the foundation for you're now an SC, right? And I see a
Yep.
lot of times, even as an SC leader, when I'm hiring, it's natural for me to look for sales engineering in people's resumes, but I
Mm-hmm.
should be looking for the things we just talked about. Like you could
Yep.
be a teacher in your resume, you could be a nurse in your resume, you could be a sales rep in your resume, but still have the intellectual curiosity, passion for figuring out technology, and desire to problem solve.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely. I also think there's been a trend recently towards the role title expanding a bit. I remember back when I was an IC, like I was very much, what's the word? I'm wedded to the sales engineer title. I was like, don't ever call me a solutions consultant. And
right.
then for one of the teams I led, that was already the name of the team when I joined. And so we just stuck with it. And over time, I've actually come to gravitate towards it a bit more. I think it's what I've noticed when I've recruited is it opens up a broader diversity of candidates. It's a little
Yeah.
less intimidating to see that on a job posting, a solutions consultant versus sales engineer. And I've noticed that it's brought in a much more diverse group of talent, different backgrounds, different experiences, and ultimately over time, I've shifted my thinking in that area. But I think, to your point, at the end of the day, that natural curiosity, that desire to learn, that's something that has to always be present if you're going to be successful in this field for the long term.
Yep, absolutely. Many names of our profession. You and I can have a different coffee talk just talking about all the permutations.
Yeah.
But that being said, what an amazing story. Most all sales engineers that we all run into, we all fall into this profession because
Mhm.
even today, there's not an MBA or master's or undergrad in sales engineering. Our kids don't grow up thinking one day I'm going to be a sales engineer, right? Maybe
Yep.
one day they'll change, but that's what it is today.
Yep.
Let's talk about you fell into it
Yep.
for all the reasons we just talked about. Man, you've been doing this for 15 years. Are you
Yeah.
bored of it? Because one of the things I love about sales engineering is it exposes you to probably more aspects of a business than any other profession because
Yeah.
you're interacting with services, you're obviously interacting with sales, you work a lot with product management, you work with
Yeah.
marketing, you work with analysts. Chris, you could have done any of these roles. You could have ventured into all of these other
Yeah.
professions. What's keeping you in it, man?
I think for me, the fact that, and this sounds a little cliche, but no 2 days or no 2 weeks are exactly the same. I mean, to your point, it is heavily cross functional. And on any given day or any given week, I find myself spending good chunks of my time in different parts of the business, collaborating and interacting with those different groups. And for me, that keeps it really interesting. I feel like I have a really broad span of the business, both on the product side, the service delivery side, the product management and marketing side. It just gives you a really good cross-sectional view of what the company's about. I think additionally for me, and I've been in a bunch of different verticals in my career. And one of the things I've always found really fun is like really becoming an expert or learning more about the verticals that you're selling into. Like for instance, I spent a year and a half at a e-commerce logistics company here in Austin. I never thought I would be able to go into the depths of the order process, how do orders get fulfilled, how do they get shipped and tracked, and what's the plumbing that moves e-commerce goods across the country. But now, I'm reasonably grounded in that area. Even 3.5, 4 years later, it's still something that I retain that knowledge around. And for me, that's just an extra little bonus. Like you get to learn about all these different disciplines and fields that ultimately power the world economy, which is really interesting.
That's amazing. It's not boring. And I think a lot of people are attracted
Exactly.
to sales because
Hmm.
of that same quality too, right?
Exactly.
Every customer, every prospect is unique. Sales is very transferable, right? One day I could be selling in healthcare, the next day I could sell into e-commerce. And as long as I can understand the product and value proposition, I can technically transfer my ability to sell across. And a lot of people go into that profession because they look at other professions and they might be like, my personality is more about I'm outgoing, I love interacting with people. I don't want to be stuck in a boring profession. And to your point, you found, it's ever evolving. And but I think when I heard you just describe that answer, that intellectual curiosity kept coming back, right? Like
Exactly.
it's going into a new vertical, and at one point you're like, oh my god, I am the expert. Like when you join a new order fulfillment company, it's got to be scary because you're not joining as a sales rep, you're joining as
Exactly.
product expert, but you don't know much about that industry, right?
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
it's that intellectual curiosity where you're like, what, I've done this before, I can become a product expert, right?
Exactly. I think part of it is also just being comfortable with being uncomfortable. For me, my biggest breakthrough moments have come in moments of discomfort where you're just struggling, slogging your way through the call, but you have some breakthrough epiphany or realization that causes you to go back and frame things up a different way to handle future scenarios like that. I've found that time and again that my biggest breakthroughs on a particular topic have been when I've been the most uncomfortable. And I think that's something that I always try to reiterate with my own teams, which is there's going to be moments where you feel out of your depth, like you're outmatched by a prospective customer. The subject matter is just beyond what you've faced so far. Just fight your way through it. We're not saving lives, curing cancer here. These are all problems that can ultimately be thought through and solved. And ultimately, by going through that process and going through that painful learning, like you ultimately become an expert in the long run if you stick with it. That's something that I've always kept top of mind as I move into new organizations. It's always held true for me.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think for sales engineers listening in, there's always this pressure that you're going to
Hmm.
get in front of a prospect and you must know everything that the prospect is going to ask. If you ask prospects that you walk into a meeting and both the sales rep and SC said yes to everything, they're probably going to leave that meeting going, something
Right.
ain't right.
Exactly.
Somebody,
Exactly.
the answer was yes and right, and yes, we can do it. So even from a buyer standpoint, people buy from people, right?
Yep.
The questions they're asking in a sales process, in a demo, in an engagement with an SE, is they are trying to figure out for themselves what direction they should go, what technology can help them propel and excel in their own visions and their own goals. And you don't have to know all the answers.
Right.
And I tell all my SEs and people that I engage with is that it's got exactly what you were saying, is being comfortable with that uncomfortable moment where if you build a credibility, it's okay to say, I don't know, but you know what? I'm going to find out. Because that's what the
Exactly.
buyer actually cares about is, are you the person I can trust for your people, your company
Yeah.
platform? I don't need you to know it, but I
Yeah.
need to know the answer. Can you help me get to that answer?
Exactly. I always viewed that as a good differentiation moment. In other words, they're sitting through 3, 4, 5 vendor demonstrations. They all bleed together. But that moment of, you know what, I'm not sure, but let me take that as a follow up item and we'll get back to you. That then gives me an opportunity to go back in and interact with that prospect at a different differentiating level than anyone else. They get to see how I frame up the answer. How do I package that up? All those little things, how crisp and timely are we delivering that? All those things, compounded over the course of an evaluation, ultimately do stand out and differentiate. That's something that can't be replicated in a feature or function that your competitive set might offer. Ultimately, the advantage is you and how to go about solving that challenge for the prospect or customer. And that's ultimately where I always felt I thrived the most as an individual contributor, was not so much in the demo, but what did I do after that? How did I stand out and deliver value to that person for each subsequent interaction? And that's ultimately where I enjoyed spending my time in support of evaluations and sales cycles.
Yeah, it's the follow through, it's the building the trust and credibility,
Yep.
all amazing stuff. You've had the luxury both as an SC, as building SC functions, as being an SC leader, to engage with a lot of sales reps and a lot of
Hmm.
sales leaders. And what I love, and again, I say this respectfully, it's like sales reps are designed by definition to be go interesting personalities. It's the mastery of selling is what's unique for them, right?
Yep.
Now you and I are unique in the sense that we've actually been in sales, but I would say 95% of SEs actually have never carried a quota and have never lived in the sales. So I think there's a perception of SCs are the ones that are winning the deals, right?
Yep.
But I feel we're blindsided because there's so much happens before an SC is involved and after an SC is involved in a sales cycle. But that put aside, I would love to hear if there are qualities or characteristics
Yep.
of AEs that kind of resonate with you or jump at you. I don't know if there was I'm sure we all have favorite AEs, but any stories about sales
Yeah.
reps you worked with along the way?
Yeah. And to start, like, these are some of my best friends, right? These are folks that the friendships we forged, driving through the backwoods of Minnesota have continued on years later. For me, when I think about across all of them, they're all unique in their own way, different personalities, different kind of styles. But I think the common thread across all of them is ultimately they were, one, intellectually curious themselves, but
Mm,
two, they really approached the relationship as a partnership. And that's a word I think you hear get thrown around a lot in tech and in sales and sales engineering. But for me, anyway, that partnership was always what was front and center. It wasn't their deal, it was our deal. It wasn't them going in and dragging me along. It was us going into battle together, so to speak. It was a bi-directional thoughtfulness around what do we need to do to set the other person up for success, whether it was tactically inside the meeting where we knew each other's verbal tics and where we were going to go next so well that we were able to just instinctually tee the other person up, to more bigger things like, hey, I'm trying to schedule this next demo and I see you've already got 3 demos on your calendar today. I'm going to actually schedule this for tomorrow because I don't want you to, come into this 4th demo of the day not prepared. And for them, it was also a realization of, am I going to get my best out of this person if they're like literally running from one demo to the next? So all that combined, I think ultimately is the common theme that I see across salespeople that I've partnered really strongly with, is that strong partnership. We're in it together. We win and lose together. It's not one person or the other. It's all, us as a team. And for me, that's something that really sticks out and continues to stick out as I guide my current teams through, their own partnerships with sales. When you see that magic, it definitely sticks out. And it certainly, I think, generally turns up in the results as well in terms of the outcomes those groups or partnerships are driving.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. It is interesting if you look across an sales and an SE function and you see the winning teams, you see the pattern, it almost always comes down to that tight relationship that you're talking about. And it's the AE-SE relationship that many people take for granted, right? You shuffle roles around, new SEs come in, new AEs come in. And just like every relationship, one, it takes a long time to build. And two, it takes a lot to maintain and nurture. And we take that for granted. But it is the secret sauce of that partnership that also, as you're describing it, it also makes me believe that people may think sales engineering is a lone sport, right? You're out there in a field, but it is a team sport, as you were describing, right? So much of it is the AE and the SE when they both want each other to win.
Exactly.
Written about from demo monkey to a consultant, right? That's the journey, that's the spectrum that everybody wants to follow. Is if you're just using your SE as a technical resource, and you and I have heard all kinds of terms, this is my technical arm, or this is my guru, right? Whatever that is, it's not that, right? Like anybody can do that. That's not a partnership, but it's the way you're talking about partnership. And I've kind of used Batman Robin analogy, and I'm sure there's all kinds of other analogies. But you're spot on, like that secret sauce of the relationship, and the reps that really believe in their sales engineer and support their sales engineer and empower their sales engineer, in return end up getting the most value from their sales engineer.
Exactly.
Both are out there to win, right? The end goal is to win more customers and better customers and long-lasting customers and customers that are going to be successful. So that's amazing. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah, of course.
Let me shift that a little bit, Chris.
All right.
You've also worked with a lot of SEs, man, along the way.
Yeah.
You've recruited a lot, you've nurtured a lot, you've empowered a lot. What are some qualities about SEs? What are some stories about SEs that you can share there?
Yeah, I'll share a story. It was actually the first person I ever hired as an SE leader from start to finish. And funnily enough, the reason why I'm at Lattice today, everything comes full circle. But essentially, I hired this woman. She was based out of San Francisco. I was at Spreadfest at the time here in Austin. She came out, did a couple weeks to onboard and ramp, and everything was going smooth. Then we hit the holidays and got back from the holidays, and she had hit a wall and was really struggling on the customer call she was on, and her demo was really choppy. And I was just like, she'll fight her way through it. It'll be fine. And a couple weeks into that, the primary salesperson she was working with pulled me aside. He's, hey, we've got a real problem here. It's starting to cause some impact in our deals. And I don't want to escalate this beyond yourself at this point, but would really love your help in helping work through this. And I essentially dropped everything for the next month and a half. I basically booked myself for every trip they had coming up. And I can remember for the first one, we spent 7 hours the day before a big pitch, sitting in the Hyatt Regency at LAX airport in the lobby, kind of working through the plan for the next day, mapping out the full demo, just essentially getting ready for that meeting,
Mhm.
going into the meeting the next day and essentially just really giving her a lot of confidence that like, hey, you've got this, like I'm here as a safety net, but ultimately I believe in you. And there, it wasn't perfect, but you could tell there was a little bit of a breakthrough. And so we kept doing that. I think 2 or 3 more trips after that. And I could see with each trip that we were taking in each on-site that she delivered, that her confidence was slowly coming back. Um, Eventually you set folks off on their own again, kick off the training wheels. And within 6 to 9 months time, they were the top performing team within the company. They took down several $1 million deals, real success story. And it was just really great to see her blossom in the way that I knew she would when I first hired her. And I think it was that kind of fighting through it together, not swooping in and doing it for her, but just really serving as that coach and safety net to build back her confidence made all the difference in the world. And it's, I think, one of those stories that'll always stick with me, but also it's really informed my approach to coaching, which is all about unlocking each person's superpower or what's unique about them and finding that path for themselves versus saying, hey, just watch me and see how I'm doing it and just copy that and you'll be fine. That experience going through it with her over that month and a half, 2 month time really, I think, solidified how I think about development and coaching of people, whether new people or people who have plateaued. For me, at the end of the day, it's all about unlocking what's unique to them and really amplifying that.
That's amazing. That's such an empowering story, right? Because it was your commitment into that individual, right? You took
Mm-hmm.
block time, right? You invested, but it's the fulfillment of being able to see somebody go from struggling to be a sales engineer to now one of the top sales engineer. And there's nothing, you just guided and gave direction, but it was really up to that individual to take that on. And what an inspiring story. And this kind of brings us back to full circle around, she didn't go to an undergrad in sales engineering
Right,
either,
exactly.
or an MBA in sales engineering. I'm sure she has an amazing story to tell of
Yeah,
how she fell into it. So
yeah,
it's all of us that are finding ourselves into this profession and then figuring it out, right?
yep,
It was kind
exactly.
of on a different podcast. I talked about this very quick analogy about if you tell your top sales rep that's making $500,000 a year to say, go, they've got medical emergency, they go to the doctor, and the doctor tells them, you know what, I have no degree, but I can save you.
Uh-huh.
They talk to their SCs that they're counting on their comp. They're counting
Uh-huh.
on the biggest paycheck of the year. And they go talk to that SC and say, what degree do you have? And the SC will say, I have no degree in sales engineering. But yet they are trusting 100%, right? 200%
Mm-hmm.
into that SC's ability, their skills, their superpower, as you were describing,
Yep.
bring this opportunity forward, to bring this opportunity home. Amazing. When you think
Yeah.
about it, there's something we're doing. To your point, it's leaders like you that are investing, because there's lots of books about sales engineering that you and I both prescribe to. It's easy for us to just pass the book over to, hey, go read this great demo or demo to win or mastering technical sales. But it's the investment that you provided to that individual, I think, that matters the most.
Oh,
Um,
absolutely.
Amazing story. Thank you for sharing that. Last question.
Yep.
There's hopefully more and more sales reps that are learning
Mm-hmm.
about our profession. I think you and I have both talked about, and the reason we coach and create awareness, because we want more sales engineers to come into the organization, into our profession, and prosper in this profession, right? So we're creating some of this content for sales engineers to get better at sales engineering.
Mm-hmm.
But as we talked about how sales engineer touches many different functions,
Yep.
product managers don't always know how best to leverage their sales engineers. Sales reps don't always know how best to leverage their sales
Mm-hmm.
engineers. In your amazing journey and successful career as a sales engineer, you work with many sales reps and sales leaders. What are some things you would give for any salespeople that are listening that
Yeah.
actively work with their SCs? What are
Yeah.
some guidance or recommendations that they could apply to get the
Yep.
most out of this amazing resource that they have access
Yeah.
to?
I think the biggest one for me is slow down to go fast. And what I mean by that is I think there's a general I think you hear it all the time, no matter where you go. Time kills all deals. And
Yeah.
I think on one level, that's absolutely true. But I think it sometimes gets interpreted in a way that adds false urgency into every step of a sales process. And as a result, things get skipped, things get accelerated, and that's where balls tend to get dropped. And so when I think about the concept of slow down to go fast, what I really mean there is early on in that evaluation, when they might be looking at 5, 6, 7 vendors, trying to figure out who are we going to narrow this down to, that's when to, for me anyway, invest more time in doing deeper discovery, giving yourself some runway between that discovery call and when the demonstration happens. Obviously, there's going to be exceptions to this, but as a general rule, being a little bit more thoughtful and deliberate up front and investing that time to really uncover the problem and then frame up the right solution and really come in and nail that first interaction, I think can pay a lot of dividends in speeding things up as you move forward. In other words, you don't have to do that second demo because you nailed the first one. You hit exactly on the problems they're trying to solve. You don't miss something because you try to move it directly from discovery into demo one day after the next, and you get a rushed generic presentation versus something that's really thoughtful and meaningful. And maybe in that case, you just don't even get moved to the next round. So for
Mhm.
me, when you slow down early on, when time is still important but not quite as critical as when you're trying to get that contract in before the 11:59 at the end of the quarter, that can actually speed things up as you move forward. I think it makes sense conceptually when you think about it, but I think
Yeah.
sometimes it gets lost in that day to day where it's just move fast, and things get cut. And I get it. Sales folks are under a ton of pressure from the business, from their leaders, and everyone ends up having to make sacrifices. And sometimes the speed is dictated by the customer or the prospect. And in that case, you just roll with it. But if those attributes or elements aren't present, I found that being a step or two more deliberate can have a huge impact on the ultimate outcome of that sales opportunity. So for me, that's probably the biggest. That and just good communication and preparation, not necessarily, oh, you got to spend 3 hours prepping for a demo, but even a 15, 30-minute check-in just to align on what are our objectives for this call? What are we trying to get out of it? Like, where do we hope to go from here? Just that, I think general level setting goes a long way in keeping the AE and SC in synchronicity as they, join those calls and present a unified front.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's great feedback. I'm sure sales reps listening in, if you just dissect some of your recent wins, right? Especially the
Right.
difficult ones or most strategic ones, I think you'll find the type of things, Chris, you're talking about is that you weren't rushing through, you weren't cutting corners, you were in sync and in alignment. You were leveraging your SC as a consultant versus throwing resources at a prospect. So I think that collaboration in a more thoughtful approach ends up resulting in when
Yep.
at first blush it feels like things are slow, they need to move fast, but I think when you look back at those wins, you do
Yep.
observe these behaviors that you're talking about.
Exactly. And I've got a bonus tip for the SEs out there, especially early career SEs. Always confirm receipt, whether it's with a prospect, with a salesperson, especially in today's virtual world. There's nothing worse than the AE or the prospect or customer sends you a note, and you're like, okay, cool, I'm going to get to that, and you go work on it, and it might take you 24 hours, and meanwhile it's just sitting out there in a black hole. Everyone's wondering, did they get it, or are they ignoring me, what's going on? Like, they start pinging you on other channels. Just that quick, hey, confirming receipt, I'm on it, I'll have something by end of day or tomorrow. Like, I've always found that one little tactical move, it buys you the space and time to think through the problem and solve it correctly. But two, it just conveys that general sort of posture of, hey, this person's on top of their shit. Like, they're going to deliver for me. And it gives them all the confidence they need to give you the space to go run.
Simple thing makes a
Yeah.
big difference, right? Chris, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule.
My pleasure.
I hope our conversation, your insights, your journey from BDR to sales engineering to an amazing sales engineering leader, amazing career. I hope it's inspiring for others that are listening to figure out, can we associate with Chris? Can we associate with his journey, and is this type of an amazing career possible for you? And then for sales reps listening in, or other people, product managers, account managers that work with their sales engineers, hopefully this conversation brought you a little bit more awareness and understanding of what makes sales engineers successful and unique. So thank you for taking your time. Really appreciate it.
My
Great
pleasure.
coffee and tea sessions, and look forward to catching up soon.
Thanks, Sachin.
Thank you so much. All right.
Cool.